Clara pressed her daughter's face against her chest so the little girl wouldn't feel how badly her mother's hands were shaking. The train was gone. The platform was empty. The man who promised to meet them had simply disappeared. It was past midnight. The temperature was dropping. And a 4-year-old girl looked up at her mother with tired, trusting eyes and asked the one question Clara couldn't answer. "Mama, are we home now?" If you've ever been left with nothing and had to find the strength to keep going anyway, this story is for you. Please subscribe to our channel and follow Clara's story all the way to the end. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. And if someone you love needs to hear this today, share it with them right now. Let's begin. Clara Whitmore did not cry when the station agent told her. She had learned, after everything life had put her through, that crying in front of strangers only gave them permission to dismiss you faster. So she stood straight. She kept her chin level. She kept one hand wrapped firmly around her daughter, Lily's small wrist, and the other pressed flat against her own stomach, where the fear lived, coiled and cold, like something she had been carrying for so long it had almost become part of her. "Say that again," she said. Her voice came out steady. She was proud of that, at least. The station agent, a round-faced man with a thick gray mustache and the kind of eyes that avoided difficult things, shuffled the papers on his counter and did not look at her directly. "Mr. Granger," he said carefully. "Elias Granger. Well, ma'am, he left town. Few days ago. Packed up and went. I don't know the particulars." "He left," Clara repeated. "Yes, ma'am, he left," she said again, quieter this time. Not a question, not disbelief, just the weight of it settling. The agent cleared his throat. "I'm real sorry, I truly am. But I don't have any more information than what I've told you. If you have somewhere you can send a wire." "I don't," Clara said. A beat of silence passed between them, like something had died in the space of it. Lily tugged on Clara's sleeve. She was 4 years old, with her father's dark eyes and her mother's stubborn mouth, and she had been patient for 17 hours on a train, and she was reaching the end of what patience a 4-year-old could reasonably offer. "Mama," Lily whispered, "is the man coming?" Clara looked down at her daughter. She bent her knees, crouching low so their faces were level, and she cupped Lily's cheek in her palm, the way she had done 1,000 times in sick rooms, in sad rooms. In every room where things had gone wrong, and she'd had to be the one to hold it together. "Not tonight, sweetheart," Clara said. "But that's all right. We're going to figure it out. Are we going home?" "We're going to find one." Lily considered this with the serious expression of a child who understood more than she was supposed to. Then she nodded, slipped her small hand into Clara's, and leaned her head against her mother's arm. And Clara stood back up, turned back to the station agent, and said, with every ounce of dignity she had left, "Is there a boarding house near here, somewhere that takes women and children?" The agent's expression shifted in a way she recognized immediately. The slight tightening, the sideways glance, the pause that lasted just a half-second too long before he answered. "There's a few places in town," he said. "Mrs. Draper's on Mill Street takes boarders. And the Tilson house sometimes. You could try." "Thank you," Clara said. She picked up her suitcase, one battered brown case that held everything she owned in the world, and she walked out of the station into the cold Montana night with her daughter's hand in hers. Red Willow, Montana. She had said that name to herself so many times over the past 6 months that it had started to feel like a prayer. Red Willow, the place where Elias Granger's letters had come from. The place where he described mountain mornings and clean air, and a house with enough rooms that Lily could have her own. The place where he had promised her, in careful, formal handwriting, that she and her daughter would never want for anything again. Red Willow had sounded like salvation. Standing on the dark main street with the wind cutting through her thin coat, Clara thought it looked like the end of something. The town was not unkind in the way some towns were unkind, loud and obvious about it, doors slamming in your face, voices raised. Red Willow was unkind the way cold weather was unkind, quietly, thoroughly, without any personal feeling about it at all. Mrs. Draper answered her door in a wrapper and a scowl, and took one look at Lily before she said, "I don't take children." Too much noise. Too much mess. You'll want to try elsewhere." Clara tried elsewhere. The woman at the Tilson house peered at Clara's dress clean, but worn at the cuffs, and let out at the seams twice, and said she was very sorry but they were full up. "Full up," Clara repeated. "Yes, ma'am, terribly sorry." The door closed. She tried 2 more places. One man's wife stood behind him in the doorway while he explained that they didn't really know her, and that a woman traveling alone with a child was, he fumbled for the word, irregular. "Irregular," Clara said. No offense meant. "None taken," Clara said, which was a lie, but the kind of lie you told to survive the moment rather than win the argument. By 11 o'clock, she had tried every name the station agent had given her, and 2 more she'd gotten from a woman on the street who looked at Lily with sympathetic eyes, but ultimately sent her on to the same closed doors. By midnight, Clara was sitting on a wooden bench beneath the overhang of the old station shelter, Lily curled against her side and finally, mercifully asleep. The cold was serious now. Not the theatrical cold of early evening that made everything dramatic and picturesque. This was the grinding, practical cold of a Montana November night. The kind that worked its way through your coat and your dress and your skin and settled into your bones like it intended to stay a while. Clara put both arms around Lily and tucked the child's face against her neck and stared out at the empty street. She had survived losing her husband. James Whitmore had been dead for 2 years, taken by the same fever that had swept through their saint. Lua neighborhood the summer Lily was too. He had been a quiet man, a decent man, a man who paid his debts and showed up when he said he would, which was more than Clara could say for most people she had known. His death had not been dramatic. He had simply gotten sick, and then, despite everything she'd done, he had gotten worse, and then one morning she had woken up and he was gone. She had survived that. She had survived the slow process of everything disappearing afterward, the house, 'cause she couldn't pay the rent alone. The neighbors, because people drifted away from grief the way they drifted away from anything uncomfortable. The money, because there hadn't been much to begin with, and 2 people's worth of living on one person's wages left nothing but the arithmetic of lack. She had survived 2 years of taking in mending and washing, and sitting up nights worrying about whether Lily was eating enough, sleeping enough, whether the cough she'd had in February was going to turn into something worse. She had survived all of it. But sitting in the cold on a bench in a town that didn't know her name, holding her sleeping daughter, Clara felt something she had not allowed herself to feel through any of it. She felt completely and utterly defeated, not angry. Not defiant, just empty. Like the last match in the box had been struck and gone out, and there was nothing left to light. Lily murmured something in her sleep and curled closer. Clara pressed her lips to the top of her daughter's head. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry, baby." She didn't know how long she sat there. Long enough that the street had gone fully silent. Long enough that the cold had moved past uncomfortable into genuinely dangerous, and some part of her mind, the practical, problem-solving part that never fully shut off no matter how exhausted the rest of her was, had begun to do quiet calculations about survival. The station doors were locked. She'd already checked. She had $3.40. She did not know anyone in this town. She was trying to decide whether the wooden shelter offered enough protection for a child to survive the night without getting sick when she heard it. Hoofbeats. Not alarmed. Just the slow, steady sound of a horse walking on a dirt road in the dark, and then the warm glow of a lantern appearing at the far end of the street like a single star that had decided to come down and walk among things. The wagon was plain. The horse was big and dark-colored and moved with the easy patience of an animal that had done this road 1,000 times. The man holding the reins was harder to see. At first he was just a shape, a broad-shouldered silhouette with a hat pulled low against the cold. The wagon slowed. Clara did not move. She had learned that staying still was sometimes safer than reacting, because reacting told people things about you that you might not want them to know yet. The man brought the wagon to a stop near the station. He sat for a moment without getting down, and in that moment Clara got her first real look at him. He was somewhere in his late 30s, she guessed. though it was hard to say exactly the kind of face that had spent a lot of time outdoors and had the weathering to show for it. He was not handsome in any polished way. He was simply solid. Built like someone who had done hard work for a long time and had made peace with what that did to a person. He looked at her. Then he looked at Lily. His expression did not change. It was already so still that it was hard to tell what changing it would have looked like, but something in him went quiet in a different way. The way things go quiet when they've recognized something important. He climbed down from the wagon. He was taller than she'd thought, and he moved with the deliberate economy of someone who never spent energy they didn't need to spend. He walked to the edge of the overhang and stood there, hat in hand now, in the cold, and he looked at her with steady gray eyes that did not flinch away from the situation the way everyone else's had. "Ma'am," he said. "Sir," Clara replied. Her voice came out flat and careful. She had learned to be careful with men who appeared in dark places. "You been sitting here long a while." He glanced at Lily. "The child yours?" "She is. She all right?" "She's sleeping." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You got somewhere to go tonight?" Clara held his gaze. She was too tired and too cold and too far past the point of pretending for anyone's benefit. "No," she said, "I don't." He nodded once, like she'd told him something he'd already suspected but had needed to hear confirmed before he could act. Then he reached up, unpinned his heavy wool coat from around his shoulders, and held it out toward her. "For the girl," he said. "She'll be cold when she wakes." Clara stared at the coat for a second. It was a good coat. Heavy, worn but well kept. The kind of thing a man needed in a Montana winter, the kind of thing he wouldn't be comfortable without. "I don't need your charity," she said. It came out sharper than she intended, but she was past softening things. "It's not charity," he said. "It's a coat," and he laid it gently over Lily's sleeping form before Clara could argue further. Then he straightened up and looked at her again. "My name is Caleb Mercer," he said. "I've got a ranch 6 miles out, got a spare room that's not being used. You and that little girl aren't sleeping outside tonight." Clara looked at him. She had been through enough to know that men who offered things in the dark rarely meant them cleanly. She had been through enough to have built walls, good solid ones, the kind she could trust. But there was something in Caleb Mercer's face, not softness, exactly, more like honesty, the raw, unpolished kind, the kind that didn't know how to dress itself up, that made her walls hesitate. "You don't know me," she said. "I'm a stranger. I arrived on the train tonight. The man I came here to marry." She stopped. Steadied herself. "He wasn't here, he left. I have no connections in this town, and no one who can speak for my character." Caleb looked at her steadily throughout all of this. When she finished, he said, "I know you've got a sleeping child, and it's 30 degrees and dropping." "That's all you know." "That's enough," he said. Silence. The wind moved through the gap between the buildings. Lily made a small sound in her sleep and pulled the coat tighter around herself without waking, some deep animal instinct recognizing warmth and pulling toward it. Clara watched her daughter. She thought about Mrs. Draper's scowl, the Tilson door closing, the word irregular used like an accusation. She thought about what $3.40 could buy in a town that had already shown her its back. She thought about the cold. "I'll work," Clara said finally. "Whatever you need done on the ranch. I don't expect something for nothing." "Didn't ask you to," Caleb said. "I'm saying it plainly so there's no misunderstanding later." Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, more like the acknowledgement that a smile might be appropriate, filed away for a better moment. "Fair enough," he said. He went to the wagon and waited. Clara stood up. She gathered her suitcase. She lifted Lily carefully, the child heavy and warm with sleep, and she carried her to the wagon and settled her on the bench seat, still wrapped in Caleb's coat. Then she climbed up herself, her back straight, her chin level, and she looked straight ahead at the dark road going out of town. Caleb climbed up on the other side. He clicked to the horse. The wagon rolled forward. They rode in silence for a long time. Lily slept between them. Finally, without looking at him, Clara said, "Why?" "Ma'am, why did you stop?" Caleb was quiet long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said simply, because nobody else did. And Clara Whitmore, who had not cried when the station agent told her that Elias Granger was gone, who had not cried at any of the closed doors, or the sideways looks, or the word irregular, felt something in the back of her throat tighten and burn. And she fixed her eyes on the distant mountains, barely visible as shapes against the night sky, and she breathed through it. She did not cry, but it was close. The ranch revealed itself slowly through the dark, first a fence line, then the shape of a barn, then a house with one window still lit yellow and warm. It was not a grand house. It was not what Elias Granger had described in his careful letters. It was a working ranch house, solid and plain, built to last rather than to impress. Clara had stopped being impressed by things that were built to impress. She had started caring a great deal about things that were built to last. Caleb brought the wagon to a stop and climbed down. He was around the other side before she'd fully processed that she should get down herself. And he lifted Lily out of the wagon with a steadiness and care that surprised her, not rough or uncertain the way men sometimes were, with children they didn't know, but quiet and sure, the child's head settling naturally against his shoulder. "I've got her, you take the bag." Clara took the bag. They went inside. The house smelled like wood smoke and coffee, and something that had been cooking and left to cool. It smelled like someone lived here and worked here and came home to it at the end of the day. And the smell hit Clara somewhere she hadn't expected and took her breath for a second. It smelled like a home. She hadn't been inside a home, a real one, not a rented room or someone else's charity, in 2 years. Caleb carried Lily through to a small room off the main hall, a bedroom, narrow but clean, with a bed that had been made up properly, and a window with thick curtains against the cold. He laid Lily down with the same careful precision and pulled the blankets up around her, and Lily curled into them without waking, the way children do when they've found somewhere safe. Caleb straightened up and looked at Clara in the doorway. "She'll be fine," he said. Clara agreed. Her voice was thick and she hated that. "Thank you." He nodded. He moved past her into the main room and added a log to the stove and said, over his shoulder, without any particular ceremony, "You hungry?" Yes. But I'm making food anyway." "Sit down." She sat. He cooked without a lot of fuss: eggs, salt pork, cornbread that had been made earlier and reheated. He poured her coffee without asking and set a cup in front of her and went back to the stove. And Clara wrapped both hands around the mug and let the warmth soak into her palms and tried to remember the last time someone had handed her something without waiting to see what she'd do in exchange. She couldn't. "You said you'd work," Caleb said, his back still to her. "I meant it, I know." He turned, set a plate in front of her, and sat down across the table with his own. "Owen and Silas are the ranch hands. Owen's young, talks too much. Silas is older, talks too little. Neither one of them will bother you. But Silas, he doesn't trust easy, doesn't mean anything personal by it." "I understand that," Clara said. Something in the way she said it made him look at her. Really look at her, the way he had at stations, direct and without embarrassment, the way some people looked at hard things to make sure they understood them properly. "I expect you do," he said. They ate. Outside, the wind pushed against the windows, and the cold pressed up against the glass, and inside the stove ticked and the lamp burned, and somewhere down the hall, Lily breathed small and peaceful in a bed that was warm and safe. "Elias Granger," Caleb said eventually. Clara set down her fork. "You knew of him. He was here for a few months. Made a lot of promises to a lot of people." A pause. "I'm sorry he did that to you." "You didn't do it," Clara said. "No, but I'm sorry it happened anyway." He looked at his plate. "A woman comes all this way with a child on the word of a man who doesn't hold to his word. That's not just bad luck." He didn't finish the sentence, but his jaw tightened in a way that communicated the rest of it clearly enough. "It was my choice," Clara said. "I knew the risks of the arrangement." "I thought." She stopped, reorganized. He seemed honest in his letters. "I'm a decent judge of character usually. I was wrong about him." "Being wrong about one person doesn't make you a bad judge." "It cost me a great deal." "It did," Caleb agreed. He didn't cushion it. She respected that. She picked her fork back up. After a while, she said, "How long have you had the ranch?" "By yourself." "A beat. My wife died 6 years ago." "Before that?" "I'm sorry," Clara said. He nodded. That was all. They finished eating. He showed her to a second room, his wife's old sewing room, she guessed, though it had been cleared and made up simply with a narrow bed and a washstand. He said good night without any elaboration. He went down the hall and closed his door. Clara stood in the center of the small room for a long moment. Then she sat on the edge of the bed. And for the first time since she'd seen the empty platform, she let herself actually think, not just survive about what had happened. What she had done, what she had lost, what, somehow, in the last few hours, she had unexpectedly found. She had arrived in Red Willow, Montana with one suitcase and $3.40, and a daughter who trusted her completely, and a future that had just evaporated. She was sitting in a stranger's house because a stranger had looked at her and seen something worth stopping for. She didn't know what came next, but her daughter was safe and warm, sleeping down the hall. And the cold was on the other side of the walls, and for tonight Clara Whitmore decided that was enough. That was more than enough. She lay down without undressing, pulled the blanket over herself, and was asleep before she had time to be afraid of tomorrow. In the morning, she learned the rhythm of the ranch, the way she learned everything by watching, and then by doing. Caleb was up before dawn. She heard him moving in the kitchen and came out to find him already dressed, already booted, already pouring coffee as though he'd been awake for hours. "You don't have to be up," he said, without turning. "I told you I'd work," Clara said. "You just got here." "That doesn't change what I said." He turned and looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "Owen and Silas take breakfast at 6:30. "If you want to cook, I won't argue." "Tell me where things are," Clara said. He told her. She cooked. Owen Blake arrived at 6:25, stamping cold from his boots in the doorway and pulling his hat off with the kind of automatic good manners that some young men still had in those days. He was maybe 22, with sandy hair and an open face that showed everything he was thinking, and when he saw Clara at the stove, he stopped as though he'd run into a wall. "Oh," he said. Hello, Clara said. "Sit down, it's almost ready." Owen sat. He looked at Caleb, who was already at the table with his coffee. Caleb's expression said nothing. Owen turned back to Clara. "I'm Owen Blake," he said. "I work the cattle mostly." "And the horses, some." "Clara Whitmore," Clarissa said. "Yes, ma'am." Caleb mentioned there might be, that is. He said last night that Owen stopped, apparently remembering that he hadn't actually been told anything except to expect company. "Well," he said, "it's nice to have company." Silas Crow arrived at 6:31. He was older, mid-50s, perhaps, with a face like weathered stone and eyes that had been measuring people for decades and rarely liked what they measured. He stopped in the doorway the same way Owen had, but his expression was entirely different. It was the expression of a man who had seen too many things go badly to be easily reassured by things going well. He looked at Clara, he looked at Caleb, he sat down without saying anything. Clara set a plate in front of him. He looked at the plate. He looked up at her. "You cook like this regular?" he said. His voice was flat and gave nothing away. "When I have a kitchen to cook in," Clara said. He made a sound that was not quite agreement and not quite skepticism and ate his breakfast. Lily appeared in the doorway 40 minutes later, still sleep-warm and faintly puzzled, her dark hair tangled from the pillow. She looked at the room full of strangers and then found her mother and immediately crossed to her and pressed her face against Clara's apron. "Good morning, baby," Clara said, crouching to smooth Lily's hair. "How did you sleep?" "Good," Lily said, muffled. Then she lifted her face and looked around the room with more focus. She spotted Owen, who had the kind of face that children immediately identified as safe. She looked at Silas, who had the kind of face that children were less sure about. She looked at Caleb. Caleb was looking at her with the same steady gray gaze he gave everything. Calm, undemanding. Lily considered him for a moment. "You gave me your coat," she said. "You were cold," Caleb said. Lily nodded, apparently finding this satisfactory. Then she turned back to her mother and said, "I'm hungry." "I know," Clara said. "Sit down." She sat. Owen grinned at her from across the table with the delight of someone who had not expected the morning to include a small person and found the addition entirely welcome. Even Silas's stone expression shifted not much, barely at all, but something in it acknowledged that the child existed without being hostile about it. Caleb watched all of it from his seat at the head of the table. His house had been quiet for 6 years. Now it had eggs on the stove and a 4-year-old asking Owen what the horse's name was, and the smell of coffee and cooking, and something happening in every room at once. Later, Clara would think about that morning often. About what it was and what it was not. It was not rescue, not entirely. It was not safety, not yet. It was the first morning of something she couldn't name yet. Something tentative and fragile, and shot through with the possibility of falling apart entirely. But it was also the first morning in 2 years that she had woken up knowing, down to her bones, that her daughter was warm and fed and not afraid. And Caleb Mercer had made that possible by doing the simplest thing in the world. He had stopped. When everyone else had kept walking, he had stopped, and he had looked, and he had offered his coat to a child who was cold. It wasn't everything, but it was the beginning of everything. And in the days that followed, as Clara learned the ranch and the ranch slowly learned her, she would come to understand that beginnings were not small things, no matter how quietly they arrived. Beginnings were everything. Everything started somewhere. And this was where theirs started, on a cold Montana night, on a wooden bench, with a sleeping child between them and a road stretching out into the dark. The days that followed were not easy, and Clara had never expected them to be. She had not come to Caleb Mercer's ranch looking for easy. She had come because the alternative was a wooden bench in 30-degree weather with a 4-year-old in her arms, and a woman who had survived what Clara had survived did not confuse shelter with salvation. She knew the difference. Shelter was a roof. Salvation was something you built yourself, day by day, with your own 2 hands, in the spaces between what other people were willing to give you. So she worked. She was up before the sun every morning, dressed and in the kitchen, before Caleb's boots hit the floor of his room down the hall. She cooked breakfast for 4 adults and 1 small girl who had opinions about eggs that she expressed with surprising conviction for someone who had recently turned 4. She cleaned the house with a thoroughness that surprised everyone, including herself. She had forgotten what it felt like to clean a place that was worth caring for. She mended clothes, sharpened knives, repaired a fence section near the chicken yard that had been listing badly for what looked like months, and politely refused every suggestion that she slow down. "You don't have to do all that," Owen told her on the 3rd morning, watching her haul a bucket of water with the efficiency of a woman who had been doing hard things all her life. "I know I don't have to," Clara said. "I want to." Owen scratched the back of his neck. "Caleb's going to feel bad." "About what?" "About you working harder than the rest of us." "Then he can work harder," Clara said pleasantly, and went back to what she was doing. Owen laughed. He was the kind of young man who laughed easily, who found the world generous and surprising in equal measure, and who had decided within the first day that Clara Whitmore was the best thing that had happened to this ranch in years. He told her so, with the guileless directness of someone who had not yet learned that some compliments made people uncomfortable. "You're good for this place," he said. "It's been like I don't know. A held breath. For a long time, you and that little girl, you're like it finally let out." Clara looked at him. "How long have you worked here?" 3 years, since before he paused, since before Mrs. Mercer passed. "I came 6 months before." He looked down. "That was a hard time. Caleb, he doesn't show much." "But you could feel it. The whole place felt it." "He doesn't talk about her," Clara said. "No, ma'am, he doesn't talk about much." Owen glanced toward the far field where Caleb was working. "But he watches, he pays attention. He just doesn't put words to it usually." Clara thought about that for the rest of the morning. Silas was harder. Silas Crow had the architecture of a man who had been disappointed enough times that he had stopped leaving windows open. He was not cruel, she understood that distinction quickly, but he was watchful in a way that was different from Caleb's watchfulness. Caleb watched like a man gathering information. Silas watched like a man waiting for the information he already had to be confirmed. He had decided something about her before she arrived. She knew that too. On the fourth day, she overheard him talking to Owen near the barn. She was not trying to listen. She was looking for a rake she'd left near the far wall, and she stopped when she heard her own name. "Doesn't mean she'll stay," Silas was saying. "Women like that, they come through a place. They don't stay." "Women like what?" "Women who've been left. They're looking for something. Maybe Mercer's ranch is it, and maybe it isn't. But when they decide it isn't, they go, and by then a pause. He'll have let himself get used to it. He seems fine." "He seems the same as he always does," Silas said. "That's not the same as fine." Clara stood very still for a moment. Then she put down the rake, walked around the corner of the barn, and said, "Mr. Crow." Silas turned. His expression didn't change, which she supposed meant he wasn't embarrassed. Or if he was, he'd decided that wasn't her business. "Ma'am," he said, "I reckoned you might. I want you to know something." She met his eyes directly. She had learned that men like Silas only respected directness, that anything else read as evasion, and he would file it away as evidence. "I'm not looking for anything. I'm not here to be a guest or a charity case or a mistake Caleb Mercer gets attached to. I'm here because I have a daughter, and she needs a roof, and I'm willing to earn it. That's the beginning and end of my intention." Silas studied her. His jaw moved slightly. He said, "Good," Clara said. "Now if you'll excuse me, I have work to finish." She walked away without hurrying. Behind her, she heard Owen say something low and admiring, and heard Silas make a sound that wasn't quite approval, but was the closest thing to it that she'd yet gotten from him. She allowed herself one small moment of satisfaction before she went back to work. Lily, for her part, adapted to the ranch with the speed and completeness that only children can manage. Within 2 days, she had learned the names of all 6 horses. Within 3, she had established that her favorite was a large, gray, placid animal named Daisy, who belonged to nobody in particular, and had the temperament of someone who had decided long ago that nothing was worth getting upset about. She spent hours near Daisy's stall, talking to the horse with the conversational freedom she gave to all creatures she'd decided were trustworthy. Owen became her enthusiastic assistant in all ranch-related learning. He showed her how to hold an apple flat in her palm so the horses could take it without nipping her fingers. He showed her how to read the weather by watching the cattle. He told her the names of the mountains visible on clear days and invented entirely fictional histories for each peak that Lily accepted with complete seriousness and repeated to her mother at dinner. Owen says that mountain is called Widow's Hat because a lady left her hat there when she climbed up to talk to God, Lily reported one evening. "Is that right?" Clara said. "And the one next to it is called Trouble Mountain, because that's where the trouble lives when it's not visiting people." Caleb, across the table, said nothing, but Clara caught the corner of his expression and felt something that she hadn't expected to her. This man's a priest who had been described to as someone dead who didn't show much. He was amused, genuinely quietly trying not to show it amused. She looked away before he noticed her noticing. The town of Red Willow was a different matter. She had known from the first night that the town was not going to open its arms to her. Small places had long memories and short patience for irregularities. And a mail-order bride abandoned by her intended, who then turned up living at a respectable rancher's property, was exactly the kind of irregularity that small places chewed on for months. The first time she went into town 2 weeks after she arrived, with Lily's hand in hers and a list of supplies Caleb had asked her to pick up, she felt it immediately. The particular quality of attention that wasn't quite staring. Eyes that moved away a half-second too late. Conversations that shifted register slightly when she walked into a store. The woman at the general store, a Mrs. Fenwick, with a tight gray bun, and the expression of someone perpetually cataloging evidence, watched Clara set her basket on the counter and said, "You're staying out at the Mercer place." I am, Clara said. I heard about your situation. I expect most people did, Clara said pleasantly. Mrs. Fenwick looked at Lily, who was examining a jar of penny candy with intense focus. And the child. My daughter Lily. You're not, that is. You and Caleb Mercer are not. I work at the ranch, Clara said. That's all, Mrs. Fenwick's expression suggested she found this answer both technically acceptable and fundamentally suspicious. She began adding up the order. It's unusual, she said, not letting it go. A woman in your position, my position, Clara repeated. Alone as husband, Clara paid for the supplies. She picked up the basket. She looked at Mrs. Fenwick steadily and said, I've been without a husband for 2 years, Mrs. Fenwick. I managed then and I manage now. I expect I'll continue to. She collected Lily, who had not been offered any pea candy, and filed this injustice away for future reference, and she walked out of the store. On the boardwalk outside, Lily looked up at her. That lady didn't like us, she said. She doesn't know us, Clara said. That's the same thing? No, sweetheart, it's not the same thing at all. Lily thought about this. Will she know us later? Maybe, Clara said. Let's go home. She said it without thinking. Home. And then she was on the wagon, driving back to the ranch, with the words sitting in her chest like something slightly too large for the space it was occupying, uncomfortable and warm at the same time. It was Caleb who first told her about Victor Hale. He brought it up the way he brought up most difficult things, quietly, without preamble, in the middle of something else, as though he'd calculated that sliding it in sideways was more likely to be received clearly than making a production of it. They were in the barn. She'd come to find him about a problem with the water line near the north field, and he'd already heard about it from Silas, and he was thinking about solutions in the focused, unhurried way he thought about most things, when he said, without looking up from what he was working on, you'll probably hear his name in town. Victor Hale. If someone brings him up in connection with this place, I want you to know something about it before you hear it from someone who'll make it sound worse than it is. Clara waited. Caleb set down the tool he'd been holding. He turned to face her. He's been trying to buy this land for 3 years. I've said no 3 times. A man like Hale doesn't understand no, he understands obstacles. He's been looking for one, and now he has one, Clara said. Caleb met her eyes. He might try to use your being here as proof that the ranch is unstable. That I'm making poor decisions, that the property's not being managed properly. He paused. I'm telling you so you're not caught off guard. Clara absorbed this. He'll say a woman alone staying at an unmarried man's ranch is evidence of mismanagement. Something like that. That's a remarkable conclusion. It's not logic he's after, Caleb said. It's leverage. She looked at him. Does it worry you? Some things worry me, he said. That's not the main one. Something in the way he said it made her want to ask what the main one was. She didn't. I'll be careful in town, she said instead. I'm not asking you to be small, he said. I'm asking you to be prepared. She thought about that distinction for a long time afterward. The first real confrontation happened on a Saturday. She had gone into Red Willow with Owen to pick up timber that had been ordered for the barn repair. Owen handled the loading while Clara went to the post office for Caleb's mail, and it was on her way back across the main street that she encountered Victor Hale. She knew him before Owen told her who he was, the way you sometimes know things by the way he carried himself, like a man who had never stood in a line, like a man for whom the space he occupied was simply owed to him by the air around him. He was tall, well-dressed for a frontier town, with pale eyes and the kind of face that was handsome enough to get away with things, and knew it. He stopped when he saw her. He took in the basket on her arm and the direction she'd come from, and he smiled the way people smile when they're about to do something calculated. You must be the woman from Mercer's place, he said. Clara stopped. She didn't have a choice. He was standing directly in her path, and moving would have required going around him, which would have been a concession she wasn't prepared to make. I work at the Mercer Ranch, she said. Yes, Victor Hale, he said, and held out his hand. She shook it, because refusing would have been a different kind of concession. His grip was careful and deliberate, the grip of a man who used handshakes as measurements. Clara Whitmore, she said. The mail-order bride, he said. Pleasantly, lightly, like it was simply information. The woman Elias Granger brought out here and then abandoned, yes, Clara said, matching his tone exactly. Though I tend to leave the more colorful phrasing to other people. His smile didn't waver. He was good, she gave him that. How are you finding it out there, at Mercer's? I find it suits me well, she said. The work is honest and the company is decent. Caleb's a good man, Victor said, with the voice of someone who didn't think so. Very private. Must be an adjustment, having a woman and a child around the place. You'd have to ask him, Clara said. I'm asking you. She looked at him directly. Mr. Hale, I don't know exactly what you're after with this conversation, but I'd wager you didn't stop me on the street to ask about my adjustment to ranch life. So if you have something to say plainly, I'd suggest saying it. Something flickered behind his pale eyes. Recalculation. She'd moved differently than he'd expected, and he was adjusting. Just being neighborly, he said. Of course, Clara said. If you'll excuse me. She walked past him. Behind her, she heard him say, pleasant as ever, give my regards to Caleb. She did not turn around. Owen was waiting at the wagon with the timber loaded and his face in the particular configuration of someone who had witnessed something from a distance and wasn't sure what he'd witnessed. Was that he started? Did he? He was polite, Clara said. That's almost worse. Owen drove. After a while, he said quietly, he ran out the Hendersons, 2 years ago. Good family. 3 kids. He said there were irregularities in their property claim and got the county involved, and by the time it was done, they'd spent everything on legal costs and sold to him for half the value. Clara said nothing. He's patient, Owen said. That's the thing about him. He's real patient. So am I, Clara said. When she told Caleb that evening, she watched his face go through several things in quick succession, controlled, but not controlled enough that she missed them. Something tightened around his eyes. His jaw set in a way that told her this was not news exactly, but that hearing it confirmed was different from simply knowing it was probable. He'll start asking questions in town, Caleb said. About you. About whether this arrangement is appropriate. And if it isn't. Not confrontationally. Genuinely asking. He looked at her for a long moment. It is what it is, he said finally. You work here. You're good at it. You and Lily are. He stopped. Started again. Nobody has a right to decide what that means except us. It was one of the longest things she had heard him say. All right, she said. He nodded. And that was that. But Victor Hale was not done. The next week, 3 separate people in town mentioned to Clara, in the careful sideways way of people delivering a message they'd been encouraged to deliver, that her situation was being discussed. That questions were being raised, that some folks felt it was unusual. The word again, unusual, irregular. The words people reached for when they meant something else and didn't want to say it directly. She heard it from Mrs. Fenwick. She heard it from the wife of one of the town council members, who made a point of bumping into her near the milliners. She heard it, most surprisingly, from the Reverend's wife, who sat next to her at a small gathering and said, in a kind but loaded tone, that she was praying for Clara's situation to resolve itself in a way that was satisfactory to everyone. Clara thanked her and said she was sure it would. She said nothing to Caleb about any of these encounters. She didn't want him to feel responsible, and she was, she realized with some surprise, angry genuinely, cleanly angry in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. Not the dull, grinding survival anger of those 2 years alone in St. Louis, but something sharper and more purposeful. These people did not know her. They had seen her for 30 seconds and decided what she was, and were now making it their business to ensure the decision had consequences. They were wrong, and she intended to prove it, not by arguing, not by explaining herself to every closed-minded person in Red Willow, but by being so unarguably present, so clearly and completely part of the life and work of this place, that eventually the story they were telling would have nowhere left to go. It was Silas who gave her the first sign that it was working. 3 weeks in, He came back from town on a Thursday afternoon and sat down at the kitchen table while she was making bread and said, without any introduction, "You know what Hale's been telling people?" "I have some idea," Clara said, without stopping what she was doing. "He's saying Caleb's losing his judgment. Says a man who'd taken a stranger without knowing her character has something wrong with him." Clara kept kneading. "What do people say when he says that?" Silas was quiet for a moment. "Used to be they'd nod along," he said. "Past couple weeks less nodding." He paused again. A Silas pause which was heavier than most people's pauses. Bill Granger, no relation to Elias, he told Hale to his face that Caleb Mercer had better judgment than most men he knew, and that anyone who said otherwise hadn't met the woman who'd been running that household. Clara stopped kneading. She turned to look at Silas. He was looking at the table. "Thought you should know," he said. "Thank you, Silas." "Don't thank me," he said, gruff and immediate. "I'm just telling you what was said." "All right," Clara said. She turned back to the bread. "And then quietly I heard what you said to Owen. About women who come through places and leave." A long silence. "I said it," Silas admitted. "I know, I'm not angry about it." She shaped the loaf and set it aside. "But I want you to know, I'm not looking for somewhere to pass through. I'm looking for somewhere to be." She paused. "If this is it, then this is it. And I will not leave something worth staying for." Another long silence. Then he said, even more gruff than before, "That bread smells good." "It'll be ready in an hour," Clara said. It was the closest thing to a peace offering that Silas Crow was apparently capable of, and she accepted it without comment, which was, she suspected, the only way he would have accepted her accepting it. That evening, something shifted. It was small enough that she almost missed it. She was at the table. Going over the supply records that Caleb had mentioned were in disarray. He'd said it casually, and she'd said she'd look at them, and now she was 3 hours into discovering that disarray was a generous description when Lily padded in from the main room and climbed onto the chair beside her. "What are you doing?" Lily asked. "Numbers," Clara said. "Hard numbers. Some of them." Lily leaned against her and peered at the ledger with the serious expression she brought to things she didn't understand, but was deciding whether to understand. Then she said without looking up, "Is this our house?" Clara set down her pencil. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "I mean," Lily thought about it. "Mrs. Henderson at home had a house and she said it was hers. Not rented. Hers." She looked up at her mother. "Is this our house like that?" Clara looked at her daughter for a long moment. She thought about what to say. She thought about honesty and hope and the distance between them, and about what a 4-year-old needed to hear, versus what was true, versus what might become true, if you were careful and brave and stubborn enough. "Not yet," she said finally, "but we belong here, and that's the start of it." Lily considered this. "Okay," she said, and leaned her head against Clara's arm with the absolute terrifying trust of a child who believed her mother knew the path even when the path wasn't yet visible. Clara picked up the pencil, and in the hallway, barely audible, the sound of the Caleb's boots slowing for a moment, and then continuing on as though he'd heard something he hadn't meant to, and needed a second before he could walk past it. She didn't say anything. She didn't look up, but her hand was not entirely steady as she drew the next column, and she didn't entirely mind that it wasn't. Because Lily was right. This was the start of it. Whatever it was, wherever it led. This kitchen, this ledger, this ranch, this particular quality of quiet that lived in a house where a man had been alone too long and was slowly, without quite deciding to, learning not to be, this was where it began. And Clara Whitmore, who had stopped believing in beginnings the night her husband died, found herself believing in this one. Not blindly, not recklessly. Not without the full knowledge of how many things could still go wrong, how far Victor Hale could reach, how long a town could hold its suspicions, how complicated everything between herself and Caleb still was and might always be. But believing, carefully, stubbornly, with both eyes open and her hand still steady enough to hold the ledger, and her daughter still asleep against her arm. Believing. And in the dark and the quiet of a Montana winter closing in around the ranch, that was something. That was, in fact, quite a lot. The storm did not announce itself the way storms were supposed to. There was no slow building, no gradual darkening that gave people time to prepare and make decisions. One morning, Clara woke to a sky that looked ordinary, went through the first 2 hours of the day in the ordinary way. And then at 9:30, Silas walked into the kitchen with mud on his boots and an expression on his face she had not seen before. "It's coming," he said. Fast barometer dropped 6 points in an hour. Clara looked up from the stove. "How bad?" "Bad enough," Silas said, and that was all she needed to hear, because Silas was not a man who exaggerated. The next 30 minutes moved at a speed that seemed to compress time. Caleb was already outside. She could hear him shouting orders to Owen across the yard, his voice carrying the particular edge it got when something required absolute precision, and there was no margin for mistakes. She heard Owen running. She heard the horses reacting to whatever they could sense in the air before humans could sense it, that high, anxious sound horses made when something was wrong with the world. Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway in her nightgown, not yet dressed, holding her small wooden horse, the horse Caleb had carved for her 3 weeks ago, and which she had not put down voluntarily since. She looked at her mother's face and read it immediately, the way children read the faces of the people they depend on for survival. "Something's wrong," Lily said. "There's a storm coming," Clara said, keeping her voice level. "We're going to get everything ready. A bad one?" "We're going to be fine. I need you to get dressed, warmest things, and then I need you to stay in this room unless I tell you otherwise." "Can you do that?" Lily nodded. She was 4 years old and she had already learned what it meant when her mother used that particular voice. She went and got dressed without another word, and Clara loved her fiercely for it, in the way you loved people for the hard things they learned too young. The storm hit before noon. It did not ease in. It arrived all at once, the wind going from cold to vicious in the span of 20 minutes, and then the snow came horizontally and the temperature dropped so fast it felt personal. Clara had lived through Missouri winters, which were nothing to be dismissed, but this was something different. This was Montana saying plainly that it had been tolerating human habitation as a courtesy, and was no longer in the mood. Caleb came in once, briefly, ice in his beard and his coat already crusted white, and he looked at Clara with an intensity that had nothing romantic in it and everything practical. "Barn roof is stressed," he said. "We've got to move the horses to the secondary shelter. Water line to the north field's going to freeze if we don't get the valves closed. Owen's on the horses. Silas is doing the cattle fence." He paused. "Stay inside with Lily. I can help," Clara said. "Clara, I know the valve locations," she said. "I walked that north field line 2 weeks ago when we fixed the fence section. I know where every shutoff is." He looked at her. Something moved behind his eyes, the calculation of risk versus need, the internal arithmetic of a man who wanted to say no and understood that no was the wrong answer. "It's bad out there," he said. "I know it's bad out there," she said. "I'm not asking for your permission, Caleb. I'm telling you I'm going." A beat, then he said, "Stay on the fence line. Don't step off. If you can't see the posts, you stop and you wait. You understand me?" "I understand. If you're not, back in 40 minutes. "I'll be back in 30, Clara said. She put on every layer she had. She went out into it. The world outside was immediate and absolute. The wind hit her like something physical, like a hand against her chest, and for a moment she simply stood against the wall of the house and breathed through it and got her bearings. Then she moved. The fence line was there. She found the first post by touch and moved from post to post, hand over hand in the blinding white, the cold so total it stopped feeling like cold and started feeling like pressure. Her mind went quiet, the way it went quiet, when things became very simple, when there was only the next post and the next shutoff valve and the work in front of her, nothing else. She found the first valve. Her fingers were already numb, but she had enough grip. She closed it, moved on, found the second, closed it. She was reaching for the third when she heard it, a sound from the direction of the barn that didn't fit the storm. Not the wind, not the horses, but something structural, a crack, deep and wrong, the kind of sound that a building makes when it is losing an argument with gravity. She turned. She could not see the barn through the snow. But she could see the light Caleb had taken a lantern in, and she could see that the light was moving wrong. Jerking, low to the ground, something in her chest seized. She ran. She had no conscious decision about it. Her body simply ran. Off the fence line, through the white blind, nothing of the storm, moving toward where she had last seen the light, which was now not moving at all. The barn wall hit her before she saw it. She found the main door jammed, something against it, the weight of the damaged roof section pressing it closed. She pulled. It didn't give. She pulled again, her whole body in it, her boots sliding in the ice. It didn't give. She stood there for 1 second. One full second in which she understood what was on the other end of that door and what would happen if she couldn't get to it. Then she remembered. It came to her with the specific clarity that adrenaline sometimes granted a detail from 3 weeks ago, a morning she'd spent cleaning the far end of the barn. A door in the side wall that had been boarded partially over and ignored, and that she had noted in the way she noted everything of this place, because she had made it her business to know everything about this place. A forgotten side entrance, a door nobody used. She ran the length of the barn wall. Her hand found the door frame. The boards over it were old, and she hit them with her shoulder and felt them give, and she went through into the dark. Caleb, nothing here. The word came from the floor. Beam came down. My leg. She moved toward his voice. Her eyes adjusted enough to find him on the ground near the far stalls, a section of the roof support across his lower legs. Not the full weight of it, but enough. His lantern had gone out in the fall. He was holding himself up on his elbows with the rigid, focused expression of a man who has decided that panic is a luxury he cannot afford. How bad, she said, already crouching, hands on the beam. I can't from this angle, pull. Let me. She got her leverage. She had done enough hard physical work in her life to know what her body could do and what it couldn't, and she did not waste time on what it couldn't. She found the fulcrum, she lifted with everything she had, and she said, move. Now. He moved. The beam came down behind his boots and she went down with it, her knees hitting the ground hard, and for a moment there was just the sound of both of them breathing. Then he said, you came off the fence line. Yes, she said. I told you you're welcome, Clara said. Silence. Then something in his breathing changed, not quite a laugh. Something more than relief and less than one. Can you stand? She said. Give me a second. She gave him a second. Then she got her arm under his and they went up together, his weight shifting onto her shoulder as he tested his leg, not broken, she thought, but badly wrenched. Enough to make him grimace in a way that told her it cost him something to keep quiet about it. The door, his side entrance, she said. Follow me. She got him out. They made it back to the house by holding on to each other and moving in the measured, careful way of two people who understood that falling would be a serious problem. She got him through the door. She got him into the chair near the stove. She got his boot off before the swelling closed the option. She pressed her fingers into the joint, methodical, while he sat with his jaw set and his eyes on the ceiling. Not broken, she said. I know, he said. It'll be bad tomorrow. I know that too. She looked up at him. He was looking at her. There was ice in his beard and a cut on his forehead from where something had caught him in the fall. And he looked, she thought, more present than she had ever seen him, stripped of the careful, deliberate composure he usually wore. Just a man. Just a person who had been in real danger and been pulled out of it. You remembered the door, he said. I pay attention, she said. You could have. He stopped. His jaw worked. If the structure had come down while you were. It didn't, Clara said. Clara, it didn't, she said again. Firmly, we're both here. That's what matters. He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved in his expression that she couldn't name, not gratitude, though that was in it somewhere. Something larger than gratitude, something that made her look away first, which was unusual for her, and keep her hands busy wrapping his ankle, which needed doing anyway. Lily appeared from the back room where she had stayed through all of it, exactly as she'd been told, and she stood in the doorway with her wooden horse, and looked at Caleb's face, and then at her mother's. Is he okay? Asked. He'll be fine, Clara said. Lily crossed the room and stood beside Caleb's chair and looked at him with serious dark eyes. Then she held out the wooden horse. "This helped me when I was scared," she said. "You can hold it." Caleb looked at the small horse in the small hand extended toward him. Something in his face, the last of whatever wall had still been there, simply came down. He took the horse. He held it carefully in his large, rough hand. "Thank you, Lily," he said, and his voice was not entirely steady, and he didn't seem to be trying very hard to make it steady. "You're welcome," Lily said, with the grave courtesy of someone who had been taught that kindness was a serious thing. When the storm ended 2 days later, its violence but the damage to the ranch was significant but survivable. The barn roof needed full replacement on the damaged section. 3 fence lines were down. One of the water pipes had cracked despite everything. It was the kind of loss that hurt without destroying, that set back without setting under. What happened after the storm was something Clara had not anticipated. The town came, not Victor Hale, not Mrs. Fenwick and her tight bun and her catalogued evidence. But Bill Granger, who had told Hale off to his face, came with his 2 sons and a wagon full of lumber. The Hendersons, the family Hale had driven out, who had apparently never gone entirely far, sent a message that they would come with tools and labor. 3 other families Clara had never met showed up at the ranch gate on the morning of the second day and said without ceremony that they'd heard about the roof and they had time. Silas stood at the gate, watching them come, and said nothing. But she saw his face. Owen was openly delighted. He moved through the arriving neighbors with the energy of someone who had been waiting for exactly this, and went about organizing things with a competence that surprised the people who'd only seen his talkativeness. Caleb stood at the edge of the yard on his wrenched leg, refusing to sit despite it, and received each person with the quiet dignity of a man who was not used to accepting help and was making himself do it anyway. Clara worked. She cooked for 20 people over 2 days. She carried lumber. She held boards while men hammered. She climbed a ladder that Silas looked at with visible alarm, ignored his alarm, and did what needed doing from the top of it. She organized the supply chain between the people outside and the people inside with the same efficiency she had brought to the ledger books and the water valves and everything else she had touched on this ranch. On the second afternoon, Mrs. Fenwick appeared. Clara saw her from across the yard and felt something brace inside her. But Mrs. Fenwick walked toward her with a different expression than the one she usually carried, less cataloging evidence, more something uncertain that was trying to become something else. "I heard what you did," Mrs. Fenwick said. "In the storm." "Getting him out. Anyone would have done it," Clara said. "No," Mrs. Fenwick said, with the particular authority of a woman who had lived long enough to know the difference. "They wouldn't have. Most people would have stayed inside where it was safe." She paused. "I came to help with the cooking, if you'll have me." Clara looked at her for a moment. "I'll have you," she said. "Thank you." Mrs. Fenwick nodded briskly and went inside, and that was that. It was during those 2 days of repair that something shifted in the public story about Clara Whitmore. She could feel it changing the way you feel weather changing, not one dramatic event, but an accumulation of small adjustments in pressure and temperature until the air was simply different. People stopped looking at her sideways. They started looking at her directly. They started talking to her the way they talk to each other, not with the careful, evaluative politeness of strangers, but with the easy directness of people who had shared work and understood each other. Bill Granger's oldest son, who was maybe 17 and had been watching her with wide eyes all morning, finally said to Owen, loudly enough for half the yard to hear, "Is it true she lifted the beam off him by herself?" "More or less," Owen said, with the pride of someone whose household had done something exceptional. "By herself," the boy repeated, awed. "She's not exactly how people in town were talking about her," Owen said, which was as elegant a piece of understatement as he'd managed in his life. She heard this from 6 feet away and said nothing, and kept working, and privately allowed herself to feel 1 full second of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Vindicated, not triumphant, not vindictive, just quietly, deeply bone-level vindicated. Victor Hale appeared on the afternoon of the second day. She saw him ride up and felt the particular shift in the air that his presence always created, the way the temperature seemed to drop a few degrees that had nothing to do with the weather. He was dressed well and rode a good horse, and he looked at the assembled workers and neighbors with the expression of one who had arrived expecting to find something and found instead something he hadn't calculated for. He found the community there. He found 20 people repairing Caleb Mercer's roof. He found Silas Crow at the gate, and he said something to Silas that Clara couldn't hear, and she watched Silas's response, which was short, flat, and conclusive, and she watched Victor Hale's face as he absorbed it. He looked across the yard and found her. She was on the ground by then, helping to pass boards up the ladder, and she looked back at him, without expression and without flinching, because she had made a decision somewhere in the middle of the storm that she was done being the kind of woman who looked away first. Victor Hale sat on his horse for a long moment. Then he turned it around and rode back the way he'd come. That evening, after everyone had gone, after the work was done, and the roof was holding, and the yard was quiet again, Caleb came and sat on the step beside her. His leg was wrapped, and he was moving stiffly, and she had already told him twice that he should be inside, and he had ignored her twice with the absolute tranquility of a man who did not consider himself fragile. They sat for a while without talking. Then Caleb said he'll try something else. "I know," Clara said. "The land records. He'll find something in them to challenge. He's been building a case for 3 years. He won't stop, because it didn't go his way today." "I know," she said again. "You're not worried," he said. "It wasn't entirely a question. I didn't say that," Clara said. "I said I know. Those aren't the same thing." He looked at her. The last light was going, and it was cold, and he was close enough that she could see the cut on his forehead had been properly cleaned at some point during the day, that someone had done it carefully. She hadn't been the one to do it. She wondered who had. "You saved my life," he said. "You gave me mine back," she said quietly. "We're even." He was quiet for so long that she thought that was all. Then he said, "When I saw you on that platform, you and Lily," he stopped. Steadied himself. "I didn't stop because I'm a good man." She looked at him. "I stopped because I recognized something," he said. "I don't know how to explain it better than that. Something." He turned the small wooden horse over in his hands. He was still carrying it. She hadn't noticed that until now. "Something I hadn't seen in a long time. Someone still trying. Still going." He stopped again, still holding on, Clara said softly. "Yes," he said. He looked at the horse. "I thought if I could help with that, just with the holding on it would be enough." She didn't say anything. "It turned out to be more than enough," he said. And that was the closest thing to a declaration that Caleb Mercer seemed capable of, and she heard it clearly for exactly what it was. The silence between them was different from the other silences they had shared. It was not empty. It was full of 2 years of his loneliness and her survival, and 6 weeks of a household that had started breathing again, and a storm they had come through on the same side. Finally, she said, "What did you do with the horse?" He looked at it. "Lily lent it to me. Are you giving it back?" "Tomorrow," he said. "She'll want it by morning." "She will," Clara agreed. Above them, the sky had gone enormous and dark and full of the particular Montana stars that still astonished her, that she had not known the world contained before she came here. "Hale's going to move on the land records," she said again. "We need to be ready. I've been going through the paperwork, and there are some entries that aren't organized well. If he finds them first, show me tomorrow," Caleb said. "Early, whatever time you want," he said. She nodded. And then, because it needed to be said, and she was a woman who believed in saying things clearly, she said, "I'm not going anywhere, Caleb. Whatever Hale does, whatever the town decides about me, I'm not going anywhere." He didn't respond immediately. When he did, his voice was low and certain, and it carried the weight of a man who meant exactly what he said, and nothing more or less. "I know," he said. They sat until the cold drove them in, side by side on the step of the house that was becoming, slowly and surely and against every reasonable expectation, something that felt to both of them like the most necessary place on earth. Indeed, Lily was asleep. Outside, Victor Hale was riding back to town with a plan that had not worked and was already becoming another. And somewhere in between those two facts, Caleb Mercer and Clara Whitmore were figuring out, not loudly, not all at once, but with the slow-building certainty of things that were true, whether you said them out loud or not, that they were not facing what was coming alone. That was the thing Victor Hale had not calculated. He had looked at Clara and seen a weakness, a vulnerability. A woman without roots that he could pull up. He had not seen what Silas saw now, what Owen had seen almost from the beginning. What the 20 people who had come to repair the roof had seen in the way she worked, and the way she moved through this place, and the way she had gone into a Montana blizzard without hesitating, because someone she cared about was on the other side of it. He had not seen that she had already taken root, quietly, stubbornly, the way things put down roots when they find ground worth staying in, not with announcement, not with ceremony, but with the deep, patient grip of something that had found what it was looking for and intended to hold on. Victor Hale had been patient for 3 years. Clara Whitmore had been surviving for longer than that. And between patience and survival, she had learned, survival usually found a way. The morning after the storm cleanup, Clara was at the kitchen table before 4 o'clock. She had not slept well. Not because of fear. She had moved past the simple version of fear sometime during the blizzard, out there between the fence post and the white, blind nothing, and what had replaced it was something harder and more useful. She hadn't slept because her mind wouldn't stop working, turning the problem of Victor Hale over and over the way a stone turns in a current, looking for the angle that would finally make sense of it. She had the land record spread across the table when Caleb appeared in the doorway. He stopped when he saw her. He took in the papers, the lamp burning low, the empty coffee cup she'd already finished. He looked at her face. "You didn't sleep," he said. "Neither did you," she said. He came in and sat across from her without arguing the point. His leg was stiff, she could tell by the way he moved, the careful deliberateness of it, but he hadn't mentioned it once since the storm, and she understood that he wouldn't. So she didn't either. She poured him coffee from the pot she'd made an hour ago and pushed the cup across and went back to the papers. "Here," she said, turning a ledger to face him, "this entry. November of 1881. The survey record for the Northfield boundary." Caleb looked at it. "What about it?" "The notation is wrong," Clara said. "Not wrong in a way that changes the boundary, wrong in a way that looks like it might change the boundary if you don't read it carefully. The surveyor used an abbreviation that was updated the following year. If Hale's lawyer looks at this, without knowing the context, he'll argue the boundary is disputed," Caleb said. "And from there he argues the entire eastern claim is questionable," Clara finished. "It's not. But it will take time and money to prove it isn't, and time and money are what he wants to cost you." Caleb was quiet, studying the entry. His jaw was set in the way it got when he was working through something he didn't like the shape of. "How many entries like this are there?" "3 that I've found so far," Clara said. "Possibly more. I haven't finished the 68 records yet." "How long have you been at this?" "Since 2 o'clock. He looked up from the ledger. He looked at her in a way that was different from his usual, looking less guarded, more direct, the way he'd looked at her on the step last night when he'd said things he didn't usually say. "Clara, I know," she said, preempting whatever it was. "I know you didn't ask me to do this. I know it's not what we discussed. But Caleb," she leaned forward slightly, "he's been building this for 3 years. He knows where the weaknesses are. If we don't know them first, we can't answer them." A pause, then he simply, "Show me all 3. She showed him. They worked through the records together as the dark outside shifted from black to the gray that preceded dawn in Montana winters, that particular quality of not quite light that arrived before color. She explained what she'd found. He asked questions, good ones, precise ones, the questions of a man who understood his own land deeply, even if he'd never been the one to organize the paperwork that proved it. They built, between them, across the kitchen table with coffee cups and lamp oil running low, a picture of exactly what Hale had and exactly what he didn't have. What he had, 3 ambiguous notations. one outdated survey marker, and 2 years of rumors he'd been carefully cultivating. What he didn't have, anything real. He's bluffing, Clara said. Partially. He has enough to make noise, not enough to win. But the noise is the point. The noise costs you time, money, and the goodwill of people who get tired of controversy. And if we clean up the records, Caleb said, then the noise has nowhere to land, Clara said. He can still file. He can still make a case. But it falls apart on examination instead of dragging out for a year while he waits for you to run out of patience. Caleb sat back. He rubbed his jaw, a gesture she had come to recognize as the physical expression of him making a decision he'd already essentially made. What do you need from me? The original survey maps, she said. And whatever correspondence you have with the county recorder's office from 81 and 82. There's a box, he said, in the back room. I haven't opened it in years. I need it open now, she said. He got it. They were still at the table when Owen came in for breakfast and stopped in the doorway with his hat halfway off his head, looking at the spread of papers, and the two people clearly in the middle of something serious. He read the room efficiently for someone who was still half asleep, put his hat back on, and said, I'll feed myself this morning. And I'll tell Silas. Thank you, Owen, Clara said, without looking up. She heard him go out. She heard. A minute later, Owen's voice outside, and then Silas's, and then a silence that meant Silas had processed the information and decided it was acceptable. She allowed herself a small moment of gratitude for both of them. By mid-morning, they had a clear picture of the full record. Clara organized it into 3 categories: solid, needs annotation, needs correction, and wrote out in her clear, steady hand exactly what each ambiguous entry actually meant. Cross-referenced against the original survey maps and the subsequent correspondence, which turned out to be more complete than either of them had expected. Caleb's wife, she realized, had kept meticulous records. The box hadn't been opened in years, but inside it was the organized work of a woman who had understood that a ranch was not just land and labor, but documentation that what you could prove mattered as much as what was true. Clara sat with that knowledge for a quiet moment. Then she kept working. It was Caleb who broke the silence next. He'd been reading through one of the original survey documents, and he set it down and said, without looking up, her name was Margaret. Clara stilled. She kept all of this, he said. I knew she did, but I hadn't looked at it. Since. He paused. Been 6 years and I still haven't opened that box. I know, Clara said carefully. He looked up. Does that bother you? It was the most direct personal question he had ever asked her, and it landed with the weight of something that had been building for a long time. She thought about giving him a careful answer. She thought about the diplomatic version. She gave him the true one instead. No, she said. You loved her. You built this place with her. The fact that she left good records doesn't threaten me, it makes me respect her. He looked at her for a long moment. Most women would find it complicated. I'm not most women, Clara said, and you're not most men. And this is not most situations. She met his eyes steadily. I came here because I had nowhere else to go. You let me stay because, well, you said yourself you recognized something. What we are to each other now is something we built after that, one day at a time. Margaret's part of this place. She always will be. That's not something I'm afraid of. Something in Caleb's face broke open and then reassembled itself, and when it was done, it looked different from before. Like something had been carried for a long time, and had been not put down exactly, but shifted into a position that was easier to bear. All right, he said quietly. All right, she agreed. They went back to work. What Clara had not told him, what she had not told anyone, was that she had also found something else in that box. Something that had nothing to do with survey records or county correspondence. A letter written in a woman's hand, tucked into the back of a folder of miscellaneous documents, never sent, addressed to no one. She had not read it. She had seen it was personal and set it aside and kept it separate from the work papers and had not mentioned it. It was not her letter, it was not her business, but she had felt it there, that sealed piece of paper, like a held breath, like something the house had been waiting for someone to find. She would give it to Caleb when the time was right. Not today. Today had enough in it already. Victor Hale made his move on a Thursday. Clara found out, not from Caleb but from Owen, who came back from town in the early afternoon with a face that had lost all its usual openness and replaced it with something tense and young-looking and angry. He filed, Owen said. He was barely through the door. This morning. At the county office, I heard it from Jim Pierce, who was there when Hale's lawyer walked in. Clara set down the dish she was drying. What exactly did he file? A challenge to the eastern boundary claim. Said there's a surveying irregularity from '81 that puts 600 acres of the North Field in dispute. Owen's hands were moving, the way they did when he was upset. Jim said the lawyer had a whole folder of documents. Said Hale's been preparing this for months, Clara said. At least, years, Owen said. Jim said the lawyer used the word years. Clara was already moving toward the back room, where they'd been working. Where's Caleb? He doesn't know yet. He's at the south fence. And get him. Get Silas. Owen went. She pulled out the organized records. She looked at everything she and Caleb had built over the past several days, the clean, annotated, cross-referenced account of every entry Hale might use, every ambiguity explained, every weakness addressed. She looked at it with the eyes of someone who had been preparing for exactly this. She had known it was coming. She had said so. She had made them ready. Now she needed to know if ready was enough. Caleb came in still carrying his work gloves. He didn't ask what had happened. He looked at her face and at the organized papers on the table and understood the shape of it immediately. He sat down. He read what Owen told him. He was quiet for a very long time. Then he said 600 acres. Yes, Clara said. That's the north pasture, the water source. He stopped. She watched him calculate what it meant, not just in money. In work, in the 12 years of this place, in Margaret's records in the box. In everything. He looked at her. We have the answer to everything he filed, she said. Every document he's using, we can counter. The survey notation, the boundary marker, the 68 correspondence, I have all of it. Annotated, cross-referenced, ready to present. She kept her voice steady and clear. Not minimizing, not performing confidence she didn't have. Giving him the truth, which was that this was serious, and they were prepared. He has 3 years of careful work, and we have 1 week of better work. We need a lawyer and we need to move fast, but we can beat this. A lawyer costs money, Caleb said. I know, money I was planning to use to finish the barn repair. I know that too. A silence. He looked at the papers. Then he said, you believe we can beat it. I believe the truth is on our side and I believe we can prove it, Clara said. Those aren't always the same thing, but in this case they are. Silas appeared in the doorway. He had evidently heard enough from Owen outside. He looked at Caleb, and then at the table, and then at Clara. How bad? He said. Bad enough, Clara said, which was the phrasing she had learned from him, and which she used now deliberately, and she saw him register it. Can we fight it? He said. Yes, Clara said, but we need to do it right. Silas looked at Caleb. Something passed between them, the communication of men who had worked together for years, who had an entire language of glances and silences and small gestures. Then Silas said, Bill Granger's cousin is a lawyer. Out of Helena. Came here last spring. I don't know him well, but Bill says he's good. Can you reach him? Clara said. I can ride to Bill's this afternoon. Ride, Clara said. Silas left without another word. Owen looked between Clara and Caleb with the expression of a young man who had just watched something organize itself in real time and was not sure how to process it. What do you need me to do? He said. I need copies of these 3 documents, Clara said, pushing a set of papers toward him. Careful copies, exactly as written. Can you do that? Then do it. Owen sat down and began. Caleb had not moved. He was still looking at the organized records, his work gloves on the table beside him, and Clara waited because she had learned when to push and when to give him the space he needed to come to things at his own pace. Finally, he said, the morning you showed me those entries. 2 o'clock in the morning. Yes, she said. You already knew this was coming. I suspected, she said, strongly. You could have told me then. I didn't have the full picture then, she said. And I didn't want to alarm you without knowing exactly what we were dealing with. She paused. I wanted to come to you with a problem and a solution, not just a problem. He turned the gloves over in his hands. It was a habit of his, she had noticed, working his hands through something when his mind was working through something else. My father used to say that, he said. Don't bring me a problem without a solution. Was he a rancher? He was. This land was his before it was mine. He set the gloves down flat. He would have liked you. It was such a simple thing to say, and it hit her somewhere completely unprepared. She felt the warmth of it move through her before she could organize a response. I would have liked him, I think, she said finally. He looked up. We'll fight it, he said, whatever it costs. We'll win, Clara said, whatever it takes. He nodded once. And that was the agreement, sealed in the plain way that Caleb Mercer sealed things, not with words exactly, but with the absolute certainty of someone who had decided. Silas came back that evening with a name and a date. The lawyer Thomas Aldridge, Bill Granger's cousin, could see them in 3 days. He had been told the basics and had said, according to Silas, that he was familiar with Victor Hale's methods, and that if the records were as organized as described, there was a strong case to be made. He said something else, Silas said, and his tone made Clara look up. He said he'd heard about the Mercer ranch, about what happened during the storm. He paused in the specific way of a man delivering something he found significant. He said the woman who ran those records and pulled Mercer out of the barn was exactly the kind of person a jury liked to see on the right side of a property dispute. The room was quiet. Then Owen said he said that? He said that, Silas confirmed, and then, looking at Clara with the expression she had come to understand, was the closest he came to warmth. Reckon he's right. Clara said nothing, but she felt it, the shift, the slow, accumulated weight of days and work and choices made in the right direction. The fact that her name, in the mouth of a man she had never met, meant something now that it hadn't meant 6 weeks ago. Not because she had performed anything, not because she had worked to build a reputation as a strategy. Because she had simply been herself, fully and without apology, and it had turned out that herself was someone worth knowing. The night before they went to Helena, Lily got sick. It was not serious, a child's fever, the kind that arrived without warning and broke within a day, but it was enough. Clara sat beside Lily's bed with a cool cloth and the particular vigilance of a mother whose child had been through enough that even ordinary sickness carried the shadow of the time it hadn't been ordinary. She heard the door and didn't look up. She knew it was Caleb by the sound of his step. He came in quietly and crouched beside the bed on the other side and put his hand against Lily's forehead the way Clara had been doing, checking for himself, not because he didn't trust her, just because he needed to know. She's cooler than an hour ago, Clara said. Good, he said. They stayed like that for a while, Lily sleeping between them. The lamp turned low. You should sleep, Caleb said eventually. We leave early. I know, Clara, I will. He didn't move. Neither did she. I've been thinking, he said quietly. The voice he used when he was saying something he'd been building toward for a long time and had finally gotten to the place where it needed to be said. About what happens after, whether we win or lose this thing with Hale. Clara kept her eyes on Lily. What about it? I've been alone in this house for 6 years, he said. And I'd gotten comfortable with that, or I thought I had. I decided it was just what life was from then on. He paused. You and Lily have been here 7 weeks. 7 weeks, she confirmed. I don't remember what it was like before you got here, he said. I mean, I remember it, but I can't feel what it was like. I can't go back to feeling what it felt like. Clara was quiet for a moment. Her hand stilled on the cloth. Caleb, she said carefully. I'm not asking for anything, he said immediately. I know where things are. I know we're in the middle of something complicated, and the timing is wrong, and there's enough to deal with right now without adding to it. He looked at Lily, not at Clara. I just wanted you to know that. So it wasn't something I was carrying around not having said. Clara looked at him across her daughter's sleeping form. She thought about the platform at Red Willow, the cold and the wooden bench, and the man who had stopped when nobody else did. She thought about 7 weeks of mornings and work, and the storm, and the ledger books, and Margaret's letter, still sitting in the folder she hadn't given him yet. She thought about all the distance between I have nowhere else to go and whatever this was now. "You're not the only one," she said finally, quietly. He looked at her then. Carrying something around, not having said it, she clarified. Another long Caleb silence, but this one had a different quality from all the others. It was not empty, it was not guarded, it was simply full of something that was going to need time and care in the right circumstances, and was willing to wait for all three. "All right," he said. "All right," she said. He reached out and adjusted the blanket around Lily's shoulder with the same careful steadiness he brought to everything, and then he stood up and said good night and went to his room. And Clara sat for another hour in the lamplight, listening to her daughter breathe, and thinking about what it meant to arrive somewhere as a last resort and discover, slowly and without permission, that it had become the first choice. The meeting with Thomas Aldridge happened on a gray Tuesday in Helena. He was a lean, careful man with sharp eyes and the particular manner of a lawyer who had seen enough to be unsurprisable, but had not yet reached the cynicism that made some of them stop caring about the difference between winning and being right. He sat across from Clara and Caleb in a small office, and he went through the organized records with the focused, unhurried attention of a man who understood what he was looking at. He asked Clara 3 questions. The first was about the survey notation. She answered it precisely, with the cross-reference and the date of the abbreviation change. The second was about the boundary marker. She answered it with the original map coordinates and the subsequent confirmation correspondence. The third question was different. He set down the paper he was holding and looked at her directly and said, "Who put these records together?" "I did," Clara said. "In how long?" "The initial organization took 3 days. The annotations another 2. Aldridge looked at Caleb. "Where did you find her?" Caleb said without inflection, "She found us." Aldridge looked back at Clara. Something in his assessment shifted, not condescension dropping, but something sharper and more respectful, rising in its place. "This is good work," he said. "This is better than good. If the other side has what I think they have, and I've seen Hale's lawyer work before they were counting on these records being disorganized." He tapped the neat folder. "They're not." "No," Clara said, "they're not. There's still a process," he said. "A hearing. It'll be 60 days, roughly. During that time, Hale's side will try to find something else to use. They usually do." He paused. "Is there anything else they might find? Anything about the property," or he chose the next word carefully, "the household situation that could be used to suggest instability?" The question landed in the space between Clara and Caleb like something with weight. Clara spoke first. "There will be people willing to characterize my presence at the ranch as irregular," she said, using the word deliberately, reclaiming it. "A woman without a husband living and working on a single man's property." Hale has been cultivating that impression in town for weeks. "Can it be countered?" Aldridge said. "It already has been," Caleb said. "By people whose names carry weight in Red Willow." "Mrs. Fenwick," Clara said. "Bill Granger. The Reverend's wife came to the roof repair." She paused. "Silas Crow, who has worked for Caleb for 11 years and is not a man given to endorsing things casually." Aldridge wrote something down. "I'll need statements," he said. "From as many of those people as will give them." "They'll give them," Clara said. She said it with a certainty that surprised her, even as she said it. 6 weeks ago, she had arrived in Red Willow as a stranger whom nobody would open a door to. Now she was sitting in a lawyer's office in Helena, saying with confidence that the people of that town would speak for her. She did not take that lightly, not for a single second. They rode back from Helena as the afternoon was fading. Caleb drove and Clara sat beside him, and Lily, who had recovered from her fever with the speed that only children managed and had insisted on coming, was wedged between them again. The same configuration as that first night on the wagon 6 miles out of Red Willow, except that everything about it was completely different. Lily fell asleep against Caleb's arm. He didn't move. He adjusted the reins to one hand and let her stay there, and Clara watched this without saying anything about it, which was the kindest thing she could do. After a while, Lily murmured something in her sleep and her small hand found Caleb's coat sleeve and held on. He looked down at her. Then he looked at the road ahead. She does that, Clara said softly. Holds on to something when she sleeps. She's been doing it since she was 2. Since her father died, Caleb said. Not a question. Since before, actually, is. But more since. She barely remembers him. James. She has 1 or 2 things she remembers, and she holds those carefully, the way she holds things when she sleeps. That's not nothing, Caleb said, having something to hold carefully. No, Clara agreed, it's not nothing at all. The mountains came into view in the far distance, the ones Owen had given fictional histories to. And the last of the day's light was doing something complicated and beautiful with them, that Clara didn't try to describe because there were no words in her that were adequate to it. She just looked. We're gonna win this, she said. Yes, Caleb said, and when it's over, she stopped. Started again. When it's over and Hale's done, and the ranch is clear, I want to talk about what comes next. For all 3 of us, she kept her eyes on the road. Not today. A long pause, the wagon moved. Lily held on, soon Caleb agreed, and that word simple, small, weighted with everything that was coming rode between them all the way back to Red Willow, where the lights of town were just beginning to appear in the early dark. And somewhere in those lights Victor Hale was in his house calculating his next move, unaware that the thing he had been trying to use as a weapon against Caleb Mercer had spent the last 7 weeks becoming exactly the thing he couldn't fight. Not a vulnerability, not an irregularity, not a woman with nowhere to go. A partner, a force, a person who had put down roots deep enough that no amount of legal maneuvering and cultivated rumor was going to pull them up. Clara Whitmore, who had arrived with 1 suitcase and $3.40 and a daughter asleep on her shoulder, was going home. And this time she knew exactly where that was. The 60 days that Thomas Aldridge had promised them did not pass quietly. Clara had expected that. She had not expected them to pass easily, had not allowed herself the luxury of believing that filing the counter-records with Aldridge meant the fight was over. Victor Hale had been patient for 3 years, and men did not become impatient simply because one move had failed. They recalculated, they found different angles, they waited for fatigue to do what force could not. So she was not surprised when, 2 weeks after the Helena meeting, Owen came back from town with news that Hale had hired a second lawyer. She was not surprised when, the week after that, Silas reported that Hale had been seen having a long conversation with the county assessor outside the land office. She was not surprised when Mrs. Fenwick pulled her aside. After Sunday services, Clara had started attending, not for performance, but because she had decided that if this community was going to be hers, she was going to be present in it, and told her quietly that Hale had been asking questions about Clara's background. Her life in St. Louis, her late husband, whether there was anything there that could be used. He won't find anything, Clara said. I know that, Mrs. Fenwick said, with the authority of a woman who had by now made it her business to know. I wanted you to know he was looking. Thank you, Hazel, Clara said. Mrs. Fenwick's expression shifted at the use of her first name, surprised, then something warmer. She squeezed Clara's hand once and let go and went back to her conversation, and did not make a production of the moment, which was exactly why Clara had decided she liked her. What did surprise Clara happened on a Wednesday morning, 5 weeks into the 60-day period, when a letter arrived addressed to Caleb that was not from Aldridge and not from the county. It was from Elias Granger. Caleb brought it to the kitchen table and set it down in front of both of them without opening it. He looked at it the way he looked at things he wasn't sure about, still and direct, and giving nothing away. You should read it, Clara said. It's addressed to me, he said. I know, but it concerns me. He opened it. It was not a long letter. Elias Granger was apparently not a man given to long letters, which tracked with what Clara knew of him from his correspondence, all those careful, promising words that had turned out to be light on substance. He had written from Colorado. He had heard, he said, about the property dispute. He had heard, and here the letter took a turn. Clara had not anticipated that Victor Hale had approached him about signing an affidavit. About Clara, specifically. About the circumstances of the correspondence and the arrangement, and whether there was anything in it that could be used to characterize her as a woman of questionable judgment or character. Caleb's jaw tightened as he read. He didn't sign it, Clara said, watching Caleb's face rather than the letter. No, Caleb said. He didn't. He set the letter down. He's offering to provide a statement instead for us. Confirming the correspondence was legitimate, that you behaved properly throughout, and that his leaving was entirely his own failure and nothing to do with you. Clara was quiet for a moment. She had spent 5 months corresponding with Elias Granger. She had built her hope on his letters. She had crossed half a country on his word and stood on a cold platform with her daughter and had her last option taken from her in the span of 30 seconds by a man she'd never met. She had not spent a great deal of time thinking about what she felt toward him, because feeling it had not been productive, and she had needed to be productive. But sitting now with his letter on the table between her and Caleb, she felt it not the anger she might have expected, but something more complicated and quieter. The strange specific sadness of someone who had been let down by a man who was not actually terrible, just weak. Which was in some ways worse than terrible. Terrible had clean edges. He's trying to make it right, she said finally. Late, Caleb said. Yes, Clara agreed, but still, she looked at the letter. We should have Aldridge contact him. A formal statement from Elias confirming the legitimacy of the arrangement closes the last door Hale might use. I'll write to Aldridge today, Caleb said. He picked up the letter. He folded it carefully. He looked at her with the gray eyes that had become, over these weeks, one of the most legible faces she had ever learned. She could read Caleb Mercer now the way she could read weather, not perfectly, not every nuance, but the important things. The real things. He was angry on her behalf. He was relieved on his own. He was working through what it meant that the man whose failure had brought Clara to his door was now, in a small and belated way, trying to repair the damage. If he hadn't left, Caleb said, and then stopped. I know, Clara said. You'd be living on his ranch somewhere. You and Lily. He set the letter down. Another stop. He was not a man who found these sentences easy. I know, Clara said again, more gently this time. I'm not glad he hurt you, Caleb said. His voice was flat and clear and completely honest. But I am glad you ended up here. So am I, Clara said. And she meant it without reservation, which was the thing that would have surprised the version of herself, sitting on the cold platform 5 months ago most of all. That woman could not have imagined being glad. She could barely have imagined surviving. But this version of her, the one who had fixed fence lines and lifted beams and organized land records at 2 a.m, and talked back to Victor Hale in the middle of the main street, and taught herself the names of the mountains and watched. Her daughter laughed for the first time in months. This version of her was glad down to the foundation. She was glad. It was the 43rd day when the second twist came, and this one hit differently from everything that had come before. Clara was in the back room, working through the last set of documents she and Aldridge had been corresponding about, when she opened the folder that had been sitting separately for weeks. The folder with Margaret's letter. She had told herself she was waiting for the right moment. She had told herself she would know when it was. She had been telling herself both of those things for 6 weeks, and she understood now that she had been waiting for the fear of it to become smaller than the rightness of it. She picked up the letter. She did not read it. She had never read it, would not read it now. She carried it out to the main room and found Caleb at the table, going over equipment records, and she set it down in front of him. He looked at it. He looked at her. It was in the box, she said. From the first day I opened it, I set it aside because it was personal and not mine to read. She paused. I think it's been in that box for 6 years, waiting for you to be ready for it. His expression did not change on the surface, but something moved beneath it, the specific, deep movement of something that had been still for a very long time beginning, tentatively, to shift. You kept this for 6 weeks, he said. I told you I'd know the right time, she said. I think this is close enough. He picked it up. He looked at the handwriting on the outside, Margaret's handwriting, the same hand that had kept the records in the box. The same hand that had organized his proof, and without knowing it had helped save his land, and something crossed his face that Clara had to look away from because it was too private to witness directly. She went to the kitchen. She put the kettle on. She gave him time. It was 20 minutes before he came to the doorway. His eyes were red at the edges. He was holding the letter, and his expression was the expression of a man who had been handed something he had needed for 6 years and hadn't known he needed. "She knew she was dying," he said, "before I did. She knew and she didn't want." His voice broke and came back. "She didn't want me to spend the rest of my life treating the ranch like a gravesite," she said. He stopped. He looked at the letter. She said she hoped I'd find someone eventually who needed this place as much as the place needed someone. Clara stood very still. "She said she'd know," he said. "Wherever she ended up, she'd know, and she'd be glad." The kitchen was completely quiet. Clara said carefully, "She sounds like she was remarkable." "She was," Caleb said, simply, without the careful grief-managed distance he usually put around that word. "Then she had good judgment," Clara said. He looked at her. "About the ranch needing someone," Clara said. "She was right." He crossed the kitchen in 3 steps, and he put both arms around her, and she led him, standing in the middle of the kitchen, with the kettle starting to boil behind her. And it was not a romantic gesture exactly, and it was not simply gratitude, and it was not grief. Or not only grief, it was the embrace of 2 people who had both lost things and found things, and were standing in the intersection of all of it, holding on. He pulled back after a moment. He was composed, or most of the way there. "I'm sorry," he said. "Don't be," she said. "I need to." He cleared his throat. "I need to write to Aldridge about the Granger statement." "Yes," she said. "You do." He went and did it. And she made the tea, and they sat at the table as they had done so many times now, and the letter was folded on the table between the cups, and neither of them said anything more about it. But something had shifted, finally, completely. The hearing was set for a Thursday. Clara wore her best dress, the gray one, with the good collar that she had mended twice and kept for important occasions. Caleb wore the jacket she had seen him in once before, at Sunday services, the one that told her he understood this was a formal occasion without needing to be told. Silas had polished his boots. Owen had combed his hair and appeared briefly panicked by the responsibility of this, before Clara told him he looked fine and he relaxed. They drove to the county office in Helena together, all 4 of them, with Lily staying in Red Willow at Mrs. Fenwick's insistence and Clara's grudging acceptance that having a 4-year-old in a legal proceeding was not strategically ideal. "She'll be fine," Mrs. Fenwick had said firmly, that morning, at the door. "Go do what needs doing. We'll be here when you get back." The "we" in that sentence, Mrs. Fenwick using "we" as though she and Clara were already on the same side of something, as though that had always been the arrangement, had hit Clara somewhere she hadn't prepared. She had gotten in the wagon before she let it show. The hearing room was smaller than she'd expected. It smelled like paper and old wood and the particular weight of official proceedings. Victor Hale was already there when they arrived, seated on the far side with his 2 lawyers, and he looked at Clara with the eyes of a man who had been recalculating for 60 days and was still confident in the answer he'd gotten. He was dressed perfectly. He held himself with the ease of someone who had done this before and won. Clara held herself with the ease of someone who had been through worse and survived. Their eyes met. Neither of them looked away first. Both of them looked away at the same time, which meant something, though she couldn't have said exactly what. Thomas Aldridge was already at their table, his papers organized in the neat professional mirror of what Clara had handed him 60 days ago. He looked at her when she sat down and said quietly, "You ready?" "I've been ready for 6 weeks," Clara said. He almost smiled. "Good." The proceeding took most of the morning. Hale's lawyer presented the challenge. He was good, polished, and precise, building the case with the methodical confidence of someone who had constructed it carefully over a long time. He presented the survey notation from '81. He presented the boundary marker discrepancy. He presented, and this was the moment Clara felt Caleb tense beside her, an affidavit from a retired county surveyor, who stated that the notations in question were genuinely ambiguous and could reasonably support Hale's interpretation of the boundary. Caleb's hand on the table tightened. Under the table, without looking at him, Clara put her hand over his and pressed once, briefly, and took her hand back. His hand relaxed. Then Aldridge stood up. He presented the counter records methodically and without theater, which was the right choice. He explained the survey notation, the abbreviation change, the date, the specific correspondence that confirmed what it meant. He presented the boundary marker confirmation from the 68 correspondence that Margaret had kept in that box for 12 years. He presented, and Clara felt the room shift when he did, the signed statement from Elias Granger, confirming that the correspondence with Clara Whitmore had been entirely proper, and that her character was beyond question. And then he presented 12 signed statements from residents of Red Willow. Not 3, not 512. Clara had known about 8 of them. Aldridge had gathered the others himself. Bill Granger's was there, and his son. Mrs. Fenwick, the Reverend, 2 families who had helped repair the roof. Jim Pierce, who had been at the county office the day Hale filed and had apparently decided that what he'd witnessed warranted a response. And at the bottom of the stack, the statement that made Hale's lawyer's eyes change for the first time all morning. Silas Crow. 4 sentences, written in the blunt, unornamented hand of a man who chose every word like he was paying for it individually. Clara had not known Silas had written it. He had not told her. He had given it to Aldridge directly and apparently asked that she not see it until it was presented. Aldridge read it into the record. I have worked for Caleb Mercer for 11 years. In that time I have seen him make good decisions and bad ones. Clara Whitmore coming to this ranch was the best decision this property has made in the 6 years since it lost its heart. She works harder than any man here. She knows this land better than some people who've been on it for years. And she saved Caleb Mercer's life during the November storm. Victor Hale would not know what to do with a person like her, which is why he's afraid of her. Silas Crow. The room was quiet for 3 full seconds after Aldridge finished reading. Clara did not look at Silas. She could not look at Silas. She fixed her eyes on the table in front of her and breathed through the tightness in her throat and did not let anything show on her face, because this was not the moment for what she was feeling. And she had long since learned how to hold things until the moment was right. Under the table, Caleb's hand found hers. She held on. The county hearing officer, a careful man named Patterson, who had the demeanor of someone who took his responsibility to get things right more seriously than his desire to get them done quickly, recessed for an hour. He came back with the expression of a man who had read everything carefully and reached a conclusion. The challenge to the eastern boundary of the Mercer property is dismissed, he said. The records presented by the respondent are clear, properly documented, and supported by original source material that predates the challenge by more than a decade. There is no legitimate dispute of the boundary as surveyed. He looked at Hale's table. I would note for the record that this challenge bears a strong resemblance to 2 previous filings by the same party that were also dismissed. I am referring this pattern to the State Land Office for review. Hale did not change expression, but his lawyer wrote something down with the rapid, tense movement of someone receiving information they had not prepared for. Patterson closed the folder. We're adjourned. The room stood. Clara did not move for a moment. She sat with her hands flat on the table, and the decision landed on her not all at once, but in stages, like water rising. The survey, the boundary, the 12 statements, Patterson's final words. The 3 years of Victor Hale's patience dismantled by 60 days of hers. Caleb said her name quietly. She stood up. Aldridge was already gathering papers with the efficient satisfaction of a man who had done his job well and knew it. He shook Caleb's hand, and then, without hesitation, he shook Clara's. This was your work as much as mine, he said, more in some ways. I had good source material, Clara said. Margaret Mercer kept excellent records. Aldridge looked at her for a moment with something that wasn't professional at all, just genuine human recognition. "So do you," he said. They went out into the hall. Hale was there. He was speaking in a low voice to his lead lawyer, who was shaking his head with the resigned expression of a man delivering news he'd already known for an hour. Hale looked up when Clara and Caleb came through the door. His eyes went to Clara first. She expected anger. She expected the cold recalculation of a man already building the next move. She was prepared for both. What she was not prepared for was what actually crossed his face, brief, unguarded, gone in a second. It was not anger, it was not calculation, it was recognition. The same kind of recognition Caleb had described feeling on the platform that November night. Seeing something and understanding what it was. Hale had looked at her for 7 weeks as a weakness. In the hall outside the hearing room, he finally looked at her and saw the truth of it. Then his expression closed. He turned back to his lawyer. He walked out without another word. Clara watched him go. She felt Caleb beside her, and Owen behind them both, and Silas at the edge of her peripheral vision with his hat in his hands and his stone face and his 4 sentences that had been the most unexpected gift she had ever been given. "It's done," Owen said. He couldn't quite contain it. "It's actually done. It's done," Caleb confirmed. Silas said nothing, but he put his hat back on, which for Silas was a complete sentence. Clara said, "Let's go home." The drive back to Red Willow was different from every other drive she had made on that road. The same mountains, the same distance, the same wagon. Everything else was different. She sat beside Caleb, and he drove, and neither of them felt the need to fill the space between them with words, which was one of the things she had come to value most about him, his understanding that silence was not absence. That two people could be completely present with each other, without speaking. It was Owen who talked, which was appropriate and correct. He talked about what they'd do to celebrate, and what Lily's face would look like when they told her, and whether Silas would actually smile on point today, or whether they'd have to wait for Christmas. "I smiled twice last week," Silas said from the back of the wagon. Owen demanded. "None of your business," Silas said. Clara laughed. It came out of her without warning, genuine, unguarded, the laugh of someone who had not expected to be this happy and found the unexpectedness of it delightful. Caleb looked at her when she laughed. He looked at her with the expression she had stopped trying to name weeks ago because it was beyond the vocabulary she had for him, and she let him look. She stopped trying to manage what showed on her face. It was evening when they reached Red Willow. Mrs. Fenwick's house had a lamp in the window and a small figure pressed against the glass who pulled away from it and disappeared and reappeared in the doorway before the wagon had fully stopped. "Mama," Lily hit her at full speed, the way she had started doing without reservation, without the careful, watchful hesitation that Clara had noticed in those first weeks after James died. The slightly held-back quality of a child who had learned that people sometimes left. That held-back quality had been dissolving for weeks, but tonight it was gone completely. Tonight Lily ran full speed, and Clara caught her, and held her up and pressed her face into her daughter's neck, and breathed. "You came back," Lily said, which was both obvious and not obvious at all. "I always come back," Clara said. "Did you win? We won." Lily pulled back to look at her face with the focused seriousness of a 4-year-old conducting a verification. She found whatever she was looking for. Then she looked over Clara's shoulder at Caleb, who had come around the wagon, and she reached out toward him. He took her without hesitation. He held her on his arm the way he had learned to do over these months, the way you held a child you had been holding long enough that your body knew their weight and their preferred position, and the way they fit against your shoulder. "We won," Lily told him, with the authority of someone who had been part of the effort. "We did," Caleb said. Mrs. Fenwick stood in the doorway with the expression of a woman who was not going to cry and was managing it through sheer determination. "Well," she said, "I made dinner." They went inside. It was 3 weeks later that Caleb asked her. She had not been expecting it at that moment, which she suspected was part of why he chose it. He had learned when she was most guarded, and when she wasn't, learned the difference between her thinking face and her feeling face and her working face, learned that the times she was most open were the ordinary times. The unremarkable ones, when nothing significant was happening and she had let her defenses rest. They were at the table after supper. Owen had gone back to the bunkhouse. Silas had gone with him. Lily was asleep. The dishes were done, and Clara was going over a list of seed orders for the spring, which she had taken on because nobody else had been doing it systematically, and it needed doing. And Caleb was sitting across from her, not doing anything in particular, which she had also learned was something he did. Sat with the evening. Let it be what it was. Didn't feel the need to fill it. He said, Clara. Something in his tone made her look up immediately. Not alarm, just attention, the tone of something that mattered. He was looking at her steadily. His hands were flat on the table. I have something to ask you, he said. And I want you to know before I ask it that however you answer, nothing changes about this place being yours and Lily's. That's not the question. The question is something else. She set down her pencil. All right, she said. He said, I'd like you to marry me. Not because of the ranch, not because of Lily or the legal situation or what the town thinks. Because I want you to be my wife and I want to be the man you chose. He paused. I want it to be a choice, not a circumstance. The kitchen was completely still. Clara looked at him across the table. She thought about the platform in November. She thought about the coat he'd put around Lily before he'd said a single word. She thought about 2 o'clock in the morning and land records and a storm she had run through without thinking. She thought about Margaret's letter and the wooden horse and Silas Crow's 4 sentences and Lily running full speed with nothing held back. She thought about what it was to choose something that had also, without asking permission, chosen her. I want it to be a choice too, she said, so I'm choosing. He looked at her. Yes, she said. He reached across the table and took her hand the way he'd taken Lily's weight. With the steadiness of someone who had learned something shaped so well that holding it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Yes, Clara said again, because it was worth saying twice. What followed was not a fairy tale. Clara had never been interested in fairy tales. They required a particular kind of passivity that she had never been built for, a waiting for rescue that didn't match the woman she was. What followed was something better than a fairy tale. It was a life. The wedding was in April, when the Montana winter had finally let go its grip and the air carried the first real warmth of the season. It was held at the ranch because that was where the story had taken place, and it seemed wrong to move it somewhere else for the ceremony. Mrs. Fenwick organized things with an efficiency that suggested she had been waiting for exactly this opportunity. Bill Granger's wife made a cake. The Reverend came out to the ranch for the first time and performed the service with the brisk warmth of someone who approved of what was happening. Owen cried. He denied it immediately and comprehensively, and the evidence against him was conclusive. Silas did not cry. He stood at the edge of the gathering with his hat in his hands and his stone face composed and unreadable, and at one point during the reception Clara caught him, watching Lily chase one of the ranch dogs across the yard, and on his face. For a full 3 seconds before he felt her looking and reassembled it, was an expression of absolute, unguarded tenderness. She kept that secret like a gift. Lily wore a white dress that Mrs. Fenwick had quietly altered from something in her own trunk, and she carried the small wooden horse in her hand throughout the ceremony, because she had decided it was the appropriate thing to do, and nobody argued with her. When the Reverend pronounced them married, Lily looked at Caleb with serious dark eyes and said, at a volume that carried clearly to the outer edge of the gathering, "Does this mean you're my papa now?" The gathering went completely quiet. Caleb crouched in front of her the way Clara had crouched on the platform, getting to eye level, taking the question seriously because it was serious. He looked at Lily and he said, "If you want me to be." Lily considered this for exactly 2 seconds. "Yes," she said. "That's what I want." Caleb put his arms around her and picked her up and held her against his shoulder, and Clara watched this, her daughter and this man, this place, this April afternoon, and felt something complete itself inside her that she had not known was incomplete. Not because it was perfect, not because it was finished. A life with a ranch and a community and a man like Caleb and a daughter like Lily was not a thing that finished. It would keep going, keep requiring things of her, keep throwing storms and property disputes and difficult seasons and moments of grace so unexpected they would take her breath. But it was hers. That was what she had not had, for those 2 years in St. Louis, for those 5 months of Elias Granger's letters, for that long terrible night on the platform, with the cold coming in and nowhere left to go. She had not had a thing that was hers, and now she did. The ranch, the work, the community that had started as closed doors and become something she could call her own. The man who had stopped when nobody else did. The daughter who ran without holding back. The mountains that Owen had given ridiculous fictional histories to and that she had come to love with a specific, patient love life to. Things that were permanent and real. Red Willow, Montana. She had said that name to herself like a prayer for 6 months, and then arrived to find it was nothing she had expected and everything she had needed. In the weeks after the wedding, life found its shape, the shape it would hold for years. Clara took over the full management of the ranch records, which had been her domain in practice for months, and was now formally recognized as such. She corresponded with Aldridge about the State Land Office review of Hale's pattern, which was ongoing and which she intended to see through to its conclusion. She expanded the kitchen garden. She taught Lily to read using the books that had been in Margaret's trunk in the back room, and she did this without sadness because Margaret had kept those books for a reason, and this was the reason. Victor Hale sold his holdings in Red Willow and relocated to Colorado 8 months after the hearing. The State Land Office review had found what it was looking for. He left quietly on a Tuesday, and the town learned about it when it was already done. Clara heard the news from Mrs. Fenwick, who told her in the way of someone delivering information that was satisfying but not surprising, and Clara said, "Good," and that was all she said, and that was all that needed saying. The night she heard it, she went out and stood in the yard and looked at the mountains and felt the specific weight of something finished, not triumphant, not vindictive, just clean. Like a wound that had finally closed. Caleb came out after a while and stood beside her. "Heard about Hale," he said. "I know," she said. They stood in the quiet. After a while he said, "You know what I thought about, the night I found you? At the station?" She shook her head. "I thought whoever she is, she's still going," he said. "Whatever happened to her, she's still going." He looked at the mountains. "I thought I hadn't seen that in a long time. Someone's still going." Clara thought about that for a long moment. "I thought the same thing about you," she said finally. Later, when I understood more about the past 6 years, she paused. "2 people still going, that's not nothing." "No," he said. "It's everything." Lily appeared in the doorway behind them with her wooden horse, that same small carved horse that had been lent to Caleb in fear and given back in safety and carried through a wedding ceremony in a white dress, and she said, "What are you looking at?" "The mountains," Clara said. "Owen says Widow's Hat is wearing her hat tonight," Lily said, peering at the distant peaks with scholarly attention. Caleb said, "Yes, he says when she wears it, it means something good happened." Clara looked at Caleb, he looked at her. "Something good did happen," Clara said. Lily nodded, satisfied. She came out and pressed herself between them and took one of each of their hands. And the 3 of them stood in the Montana evening, with the mountains in front of them, and the house warm and lit behind them, and the sound of Owen and Silas somewhere inside, arguing cheerfully about something that didn't matter at all. And everything that had been wrong about the world 6 months ago was still in the past where it belonged. Clara Whitmore had arrived in Red Willow with 1 suitcase, $3.40, a sleeping daughter, and nowhere left to go. She stood now in her yard, with her husband's hand in one of hers, and her daughter's in the other, and the ranch that bore her name on its deed spread out around her in every direction hers earned, documented, defended, and kept. She had not been rescued. She had built this, one cold night. 1 act of work organized, 1 beam lifted. 1 door remembered, 1 statement signed, 1 choice made freely in a warm kitchen, across a table she had cleaned 100 times and would clean 100 more. This was what survival looked like when it was done right. Not a woman waiting to be found. A woman who had found everything worth having and refused with both hands, with every ounce of the stubbornness that had carried her across half a country on a stranger's word, and through a blizzard on a stranger's behalf, and through 60 days of legal combat with a man who had 3 years head start, refused to let any of it go. Clara Mercer was home, and she was never sleeping outside again.